Another peaceful evening in Bikini Bottom. Listen to the tropical tranquility.
You may have heard of Bikini Bottom from the kids' Nickelodeon show SpongeBob SquarePants, but did you know the hometown of one of the most beloved children's cartoon characters is based on a real place? The Bikini Atoll, part of the Marshall Islands located in the South Pacific, is one of the two main coral atolls evolved in the Marshall Islands nuclear testing. The Marshall Islands, located halfway between Hawaii and Australia, consisting of 29 coral atolls, were subjected to 67 of the United States' nuclear tests from 1946 to 1958. Making it one of the most irradiated places on Earth. Among them was Castle Bravo, one of the hydrogen bombs detonated on Bikini Atoll. In a 1954 report regarding the nature of this bomb by nuclear scientist Nikolai Markovich Emanuel, he emphasizes the high levels of gamma radiation along the follow path, and in relation to this, the dangers that arise after the detonation of the hydrogen bombs. He proceeds to explain that the bomb is 15 megatons, which is over 1,000 times the force of the bomb that had previously been dropped on Hiroshima.
In an excerpt from his book, The Global Cold War, Odd Arne Westad discusses themes of the Cold War by comparing the intentions of the United States and Soviet Union to those of former European imperialist powers. He argues that America's and the Soviet Union's involvement in the Cold War was based on ideological motivations aimed towards progress and development in the Third World. The nuclear testing conducted by the United States in the Marshall Islands during the Cold War both supports and challenges Westad's argument that the Cold War differed from earlier European imperialism in its motivations. Unlike past European imperial powers, the United States did not seek to exploit or colonize the Marshallese people. They intended further to develop their research on nuclear weapons and security. However, America carried on with the nuclear testing despite its terrible effects and the reluctance to relocate the Marshallese.
A stronger power has occupied the Marshallese Islands since humans settled there in the second millennium BCE. From 1914 to 1944, the islands were under Japanese occupation until the U.S. Army and Marine Forces defeated Japanese troops in the Marshall Islands in February of 1944, turning two of the atolls into U.S. military bases. The United States immensely expanded its nuclear research in the post-World War II period out of fear of the Soviet Union developing its atomic weapons. In a statement by President Truman in 1949, he admits that the United States government found evidence that within recent weeks an atomic explosion occurred in the USSR. As a result of this discovery, the U.S. further believed that, by increasing its nuclear arms, it would be easier to establish U.S. power over Soviet Union and other foreign nations in general. Truman's decision to test the hydrogen bombs in the Marshall Islands was due to their remote location and small population.
When America first planned on nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, military officials made an effort to protect the Marshallese by temporarily relocating them to different, much smaller atolls where testing would not be conducted. America did this to continue testing without potentially harming any of the islanders. This attempt supports Westad in his argument that the superpowers of the Cold War had positive intentions. The U.S. wanted to ensure that no one would be harmed in the process of their nuclear tests.
Initially, the Marshallese were relocated from their homes to avoid danger, but eventually the United States ceased to relocate them. During an account of the bombing, Rocco Longlebek, a survivor from the 1954 Castle Bravo test on Bikini Atoll, stated, "I was very scared. My parents didn't understand what was happening. I don't know why the government didn't move us. Before they would move us around." Longlebek's words reflect the confusion and fear felt by many Marshallese, amplified by the government's failure to communicate. This account reveals not only the trauma that the testing left behind, but the exclusion and silence forced upon a colonized people, highlighting the U.S.'s disregard for the Marshallese lives and the ethical challenges of nuclear imperialism.
Additionally, the United States looked the other way and silenced those affected by the nuclear testing. In Bravo for the Marshallese, a book by Holly Barker, official reports often deliberately remove the voices of those most affected, allowing the United States to avoid accountability for its inhumane actions. Barker, a cultural anthropologist, emphasizes how Marshallese oral testimonies contradict scientific narratives and challenge the ethics of nuclear testing. The Cold War's ideological goals masked a form of colonialism, as America lost sight of the safety of the lives of those who mattered most.
The United States' hesitation reveals how it took advantage of the Marshallese land, further conveying its imperialist choices. This contradiction complicates Westad's argument because although Cold War powers had innocuous intentions, they still provoked inequality and colonized weaker foreign populations. Further, the nuclear scientist we mentioned before, Nikolai Markovich Emanuel, is just one of the many nuclear scientists whose focus remained on data and statistics rather than human cost, as his primary audience was government and military officials. This inconsiderate standpoint of so many scientists during this time of nuclear growth caused authorities within the United States to legitimize the atomic testing and dismiss the lived experiences of those affected by these bombings. Even though the goal was development, the cost was immense for the Marshallese.
In the book African Americans Against the Bomb, scholar Vincent Intondi critiques how narratives of Social Security often exclude non-white lives and argues that marginalized voices, like the Marshallese, were systematically erased. Race, geography, and global power intersected in U.S. Cold War strategies. The testing also left behind a legacy of radiation that caused cancers and illness so harmful they got passed down through generations. An article by Legion Eneling, a survivor, details the congenital disabilities and hardships of the relocations. Many were confused and uninformed about the tests conducted by the government, and Eneling states that elders thought another war was starting. Children were playing with poisoned snow, a byproduct of the bombs, causing sickness as well as burns all over their bodies. She states that she herself cannot have children due to radiation poisoning and discusses jellyfish babies, or children born without bones, transparent skin, and sometimes with no arms, legs, or even heads. Her testimony served as a document of the suffering and a demand for a recognition. She is one of the many Marshallese voices who resisted their erasure by telling their own story. To make matters worse, U.S. government agencies manipulated health data and did not provide adequate medical care.
The United States attempted to return the Marshallese to their land in the 1970s, but the island remained unsafe due to the effects of the radiation that were still prevalent. A 1968 New York Times article recounts the return of 9 men to the Bikini Atoll 22 years later after the test. They describe the changes and destruction of their home, with one man stating, "It's all changed, it's not the same." This quote emphasizes the irreversible loss experienced by the displaced Marshallese and gives voice to personal devastation. Along with the intense radiation preventing them from safely returning home, the bombs left destruction and debris, forever changing the Marshallese' homeland.
A 1958 New York Times article reports on a petition from the Marshallese to the United Nations, highlighting the severe health impacts felt by those living hundreds of miles away from the testing sites. It details symptoms such as nausea, burns, falling hair, and lowering of blood count. The Marshallese urged for the test to end, and if they had to continue, they requested that proper safety measures be implemented, including relocation and education on safety rules. The Marshallese assert their humanity and agency in this petition, displaying that their resistance was not passive but deliberate.
The Marshall Islands' nuclear testing lasted for over 10 years. Throughout this decade, the intentions of the United States failed to remain the same, as the nation initially kept the well-being of the Marshallese in mind, but eventually lost sight of its goal. What was supposed to be harmless testing to develop the U.S.'s nuclear technology turned into an imperialist outlook from America's standpoint. America became no longer worried about who they were affecting or how they were affecting them, and only kept their best interest in mind, which was why the Marshall Islands nuclear testing both supports and complicates Westad's argument about the Cold War. Unlike traditional European imperial powers, the U.S. did not aim to colonize or exploit the Marshallese people. Instead, its primary goal was to advance nuclear weapon research and national security. Nevertheless, the continuation of testing, despite its devastating consequences and the Marshallese people's resistance to relocation, reveals parallels to imperial practices in terms of disregard for indigenous lives and autonomy.